You may be asking yourself, what is scientific notation? Scientific notation is another way, it's an easier way really, of writing really, really large numbers or writing really, really small numbers. So the way the scientific notation works is, let's say I have the number 1357500. Oops. Alright, in this number right here, I don't have a decimal, but it's understood that my decimal is back at the end. To write numbers in scientific notation, you can only have one number in front of the decimal. And it needs to be between the numbers 1 through 9. You cannot have 0 in front of it. Then after the decimal, you have every other number except for the zeros. And those zeros are the ones that are at the end. So in this case, I would have 1.3575. I'm not going to write those zeros because those are the ending zeros. Then I'm going to write times 10. And the reason I'm going to write times 10 is because we know that any time you move the decimal, you're moving it 1/10 in a sense. So there's many different ways that you can count how many times you move the decimal. I think it's easier just to draw lines between them like that. Some people, and you'll see some teachers, loop. I get a little confused with the looping because of the spaces, so I know personally for me, it's easier if I do the lines. Do whatever's easiest for you. No teacher's going to get mad at you for doing it one way more than the other way. And I'm just going to count. I moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I always count the spot where I land, and it's going to be times 10 to the 9th. This right here tells you how many times you move the decimal. And I apologize for my handwriting. Okay? It's going to be a positive 9 because the number I'm starting with is larger than 1. I'm going to do another example on the next page as to the other way you can write it. So we just went through how to write it if the number is larger than 1. Now I'm going to show you an example of what happens if the number is less than 1. So let's say I start with okay, now, first thing, I got to figure out where my decimal goes. We know from the previous slide that the rule is there's only one number in front of the decimal, and that number needs to be between 1 and 9. So I'm going to put my decimal in between my 3 and my 7, because 3 is the first number that's not a 0, and that's how I know where my decimal goes. So I'm going to write 3.705. Now the reason I'm writing that 0 in there is because that's part of the number. That's not one of your initial zeros or your ending zeros, depending on the number you have. I'm still going to write my times 10, because every time I move the decimal, I'm moving it 1/10 of a place. Now, I'm still going to count how many times I move the decimal. So I'm moving it 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of making it a positive 4, I'm going to put to the negative 4. And the reason for that is because my number I'm starting with is less than 1. So I know that my exponent in my number has to be smaller than that, and so it's going to be to the negative 4. That's the main difference between using a positive exponent and a negative exponent. Just remember, positive exponent, your number is larger than one you start out with. If it's a negative exponent, your number is smaller. And the reason we do that is because sometimes you're going to actually get problems where they give it to you in scientific notation and you have to write it in standard form. So the last two slides went over how to write it from standard form to scientific. And now we're going to go backwards just so you kind of understand the two different ways. So let's say I have 4.65 times 10 to the third. Okay, I'm going to write out 4.65, and I'm moving it 3 spots, because remember that exponent up there tells me how many times to move it. It's a positive, which means my number is going to have to be larger than 1. So I'm going to move my decimal 3 spots to the right. Now in this blank spot, I'm just going to put a 0, because that doesn't change the value of the number. That's your placeholder. So 4 and 65 hundredths times 10 to the third, written in standard form, is 4,650. Now let's say I had 3.12 times 10 to the negative 4th. Okay, so I'm going to write out my 3.12, and it's to a negative 4, which means my number is going to be smaller than 1. So it's going to be smaller than 1. I'm going to have to move the decimal to the left 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to fill these numbers in with zeros. So this number in standard form looks like this. And to double check if my exponent's negative, is that number in standard form smaller than 1? Yes, it is. So then I know it's okay. And this will help you with page 27 of the packet. Okay, I'm going to do one of the examples on page 29 on how to multiply scientific notation numbers together. And I'm going to do the first one where it says work together. So you have 7 times 10 to the negative 6 multiplied by 2 and 5/10 times 10 to the 4th. So you're going to do this in multiple steps, okay? So what we're first going to do is we're going to multiply our regular numbers. So we're going to do 7 times 2.5. Okay, and 7 times 2.5 is 17 and 5/10. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply our bases here. Now this goes with the laws of exponents, which I know you're not familiar with yet. We do go over that. Usually in about September, October, we go over the laws of exponents with you guys. But this one's very simple. Your bases are the same, so you're going to add your exponents. Okay, so we're going to have 10 to the negative 6, and we're technically multiplying it by 10 to the 4th. Sorry, that's a better dot. Okay, now really we're just adding. So we're really just doing 10 to the negative 6, and we're just adding the exponents, and that's it, because our base of 10 is the same. So I'm doing negative 6 plus 4, which negative 6 plus 4 really gives me 10 to the negative 2. So my answer is 17 and 5/10 times 10 to the negative 2. Well, if you look at my answer, you'll notice I already said one of the rules is you can only have one number in front of the decimal, and right now I have 2 numbers in front of the decimal. So I need to rewrite it in the correct standard form. So I'm going to take my decimal, I move it to the right 1, because only one number in front of the decimal. So I really have 1 and 75 hundredths times 10. Now because I moved it to the left 1 spot, I have to take away one of my times I've moved the decimal, so this negative 2 becomes a negative 1. So although there's a few extra steps in this, it's not as overwhelming as what it first initially seems like. For A and for B, go ahead and work through those. Just remember with your find the product of the powers of 10. Remember, you're just going to add your exponents together. You're going to keep the 10 the same.